Folks, welcome back to part 2 of our mini pits build, our mini pits from Twisted Hobbies. Things went pretty well in part 1. Part 2, we're going to finish off the rest of the build, which won't take too long, and then we're going to have some flight videos and get a little bit of sky time, so stay tuned. So now that the tail section is dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a small piece, very small piece of Blindern tape right across this seam and one across the upper seam here, just for a little bit of reinforcement, because the way this goes on, there's no extra reinforcement at all here. I'm only going to put a very small piece, and the reason we use Blindern tape, it's like a medical tape and it's very flexible, so it will not, you know, if you put it on a seam, on a hinge, it works really well because it'll flex. Really don't care about it flexing on these sections, but it's also, you know, very durable type of tape to use. And I'll go ahead and apply that next. So I got a Blindern tape applied in both spots, and what I did, normally I'd use CA, but in this case I just already had epoxy mixed up, left over from the previous step, so I just used a little bit of that same epoxy, and it works really well. But this tape can be glued with pretty much any glue to hold it on, either foam tack, epoxy, or CA. So we're ready to move on to the next step. So the next thing I'm going to do is glue on the remaining control horns. And I switched to the carbon fiber kit, so I had to find the carbon fiber equivalent to the elevator and the rudder control horns. The rudder is going to be the one that's longer. The elevator is going to be this one that's shorter. So you just match up. If you're using the carbon fiber, match it up with the same ones that you would have been using for the the regular components in the kit. Remember to sand these surfaces that are going to be glued on the carbon fiber to rough them up a little bit prior to gluing. So now we're going to put the motor mount on the front of the plane. Now if you've noticed, I've already scuffed up with sandpaper one side. This will give it really good adhesion for the glue. The other side, of course, is not. And that's going to sit right on here like this. And then once I glue this in place, I'm going to use some push pins to hold it there while it dries. These are the medium size push pins I'm going to use. And again, you can use foam tack, or any other type of glue you have, CA. I'm going to use the 30-minute epoxy. I like it. It seems to hold the best and the strongest. I know it takes a while, but that's just my preference. Use what you wish. And let's go ahead and glue the front on, the motor mount on. So now I'm going to put a tiny little piece of Blindern tape. This is optional. Doesn't show in the actual directions to do this, but so now we're going to put the reinforcement spars into the fuselage, and what you want to do is locate. You can see there's 6 total. The 2 longest ones are for the landing gear, and then you have 2 of the smaller ones and 2 of the medium ones. The medium ones are the 107 or 108 millimeters. The smaller ones are the 70 millimeter ones, and these are the 4 that we're going to be using. The 2 larger ones, set those aside because that'll be later for the landing gear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an X-Acto knife. I'm going to cut out the slot for the shorter piece from the mid fuselage up, And the larger piece is going to need to cut out, and this is going to be cut all the way through. There should be a slot already partially here, and cut it through, and it's going to run the entire length all the way down to the bottom. Don't cut all the way through to the very ends of the fuselage, but you can see where it'll go pretty close. And we want to cut these out first and do a pre-fit, and one will go in from each side, because there's two for each, one for each side, and they're going to press in and meet in the middle. We're going to cut these out and test them first before we go to glue. So I've test fit my pieces after cutting it out. Make sure you use a really sharp X-Acto. It'll make this go a lot easier and do minimal damage to the foam. If you have a dull X-Acto, it can start taking out more material than you want. But these are test fits, so now I'm ready to glue these in, one from this side and another set for here and here on the other side. So I got the supports in, got them in from the front, from left and right sides, so they meet up in the middle, and it turned out pretty good. However, I will recommend not using the foam tack like I did. I mean, the foam tack worked fine, but it doesn't give you a lot of working time. I think I would have used a 30-minute epoxy to give it more time to set up, because it was kind of pain in the rushing to get everything down through the medium fuselage and get everything in here. It was kind of a pain in racing against the clock before the glue dried and made a little bit of a mess. So definitely would recommend a 30-minute epoxy, but if you want to use foam tack, go ahead. I'd highly recommend not using CA, because maybe the medium CA, it takes a little longer to dry, but you definitely need some time to get these adjusted and put in there. So really, I think 30-minute epoxy would be a better way to go. Now we're going to attach the bottom wing, and to do that, we're going to need the little doublers, the wood ones. If you have the kit, take those out and clean them up. Or if you're using the carbon fiber kit, you'll have these little guys, and the pointy ones, they're the two we want to use in the bottom. So I'm going to get the other ones out of the way. And you need to sand both sides of these to get them ready to have good adhesion for the glue. And we're going to go through attaching these and the bottom wing here in just a second. But I have the plane set up like this because I want to show you something. One thing I didn't see in the directions is an alignment. Once you plug this in, you just automatically assume it's aligned, but that's not the case. When I measured from this corner of this wing to the corner of the elevator here, I was noticing the difference between this side of the plane and this side of the plane was over an inch difference. And you really don't want that. So I aligned it up just right and found that for my plane here, that I'm measuring about 13 inches with a tape measure from this corner to this corner on both sides. Again, 13 inches. If you line it up for both sides for 13 inches, then you should go together. The plane should go together really well. Otherwise, it can be really squirrely in the air. So you really need to check that alignment. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of glue around the little supports next to the fuselage on both sides. Then we'll go ahead and line up the left and right sides with the ruler to make sure that we have the same distance on both sides. So now the glue is curing. You can see kind of what it looks like here when it's come together. And again, I got right about 13 inches from this point to this point on both sides of the aircraft. And I'm just going to let this set up and dry for a few hours. So while this is finishing up drying the wing, it's already dried for over half an hour. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and grab the two upper wing supports, and we're going to glue those on. And it needs to be sitting so that the supports face forward. You know, you don't want it facing back this way. It needs to face forward for the upper wing. And then you probably want to go ahead and do a fit check on everything before continuing, just to make sure everything's going to line up. And once you're sure everything is good there, go ahead. I'm going to use foam tack. You can use CA foam tack or epoxy, whichever you like, and just put it across the sides, the slot, and the side over here. Don't do the bottom because that just goes through and it's going to get glue underneath. Now while everything is still drying, I'm going to go ahead and put the doublers on. Put the little curved piece here towards the front. And put one on the front and the back. I'm going to use 5-minute epoxy for this because I want it to dry a little bit quicker, but I do want at least a little bit of time to maneuver it in place. And then I will make sure that the slot lines up using the little extra piece of landing gear we haven't used yet. And one of these guys, and just make sure the slot is lined up properly. Line this up with the top on both sides. I'll use a clamp to clamp it on when I'm finished. A very light clamp because I don't want to squish the foam. And then give this time to set up. Just got to make sure that I do something to get the remaining glue out of the slot so I don't have to go use an X-Acto to dig the slot out later, because when the top wing goes on, the cross member has to be able to go down into that slot. So let's get going. Now I'm going to use some foam tack and attach the top wing. Make sure you do a dry fit first before gluing all your surfaces. So next thing we're going to do is put on the two landing gear struts. Now I'm not actually going to put the landing gear on my aircraft. You can finish this part of it if you'd like. I'm going to trim mine off once the glue dries. But basically there's this hole right here, and I'm going to put one of the landing gear struts through there, and there's a slit right here in the foam. So I'm going to put that right into the slit. Now this slit doesn't go all the way through, so you just kind of set it on there. Then you do the exact same thing coming from the other direction. So I'm going to go in over here and go down, put it right in that slot. So I've got the two slots set, and now you can glue these with whatever you'd like to glue them with. You can use epoxy, the welders, or the foam tack, CE, whatever you want to glue them with. I'm going to use the epoxy again because I think that's going to be the strongest to hold up for the longest amount of time. Now you can finish the rest of the landing gear yourself by adding the landing gear to the end of the struts. I myself, once I'm going to leave them on there now for now, so it helps to do the assemblies for what's coming, but then later I'm going to trim these two pieces off because I don't really want the landing gear, but I do want the support for the struts. Hey doggy, stop your squeaking over there. I'm making a video. Are you the one over here making all the squeakiness? Are you the one doing all that squeaking? Little squeaker. See, now it is an election year, so she's the newly elected squeaker of the house. Yeah, I went there. Okay, so the landing gear and strut supports are glued in. I epoxied those in. Gonna let that dry now. While I was here, I noticed that my servo actually kind of was glued a little bit anyway. So I went ahead and put a little foam tack in there to glue this servo, the aileron servo, into place. Alright, so now we have the landing gear installed. Again, later I'm going to cut it off right here, just leave the support part in place, but I'm going to leave it on for now because that will help with the next few steps. So we are going to take the vortex generators and install them, and you have these two together. This will go on one side, same over here. I've already separated these. Now you notice these have a top and bottom, and you'll cut them right down the middle, and it'll go in with the small size on the top here. When we put in the one up here, the small size again goes to the inner side of the wings, the larger side being on the outer surfaces. These, however, you'll have one that'll go up here, one that'll go down here, and they are in line with the strut that holds the wings together. So let's get installing. Okay, so all the vortex generators are now installed on both sides, as you can see. So the next thing we're going to do is start hooking up all of the control rods to the servo horns and control horns on the aircraft. Okay, so I've got the plane powered so that the ailerons are in a neutral position, and I've taped the top wings to keep them, on both sides in a neutral position. And I've also attached the linkages we previously put together to the bottom on each side, and I've attached the little connecting rod piece here. Don't forget to put the heat shrink on before lining this up. I'm going to line this up, trim it to the right length to fit right within the little piece here, and then I will be ready to heat shrink it after that. And I'm going to go ahead and use the epoxy again. I definitely want to use a 30-minute epoxy simply because it gives me plenty of work time to get these, to make sure the wings are exactly where they need to be so that the top and bottom wing are both in the neutral position. So you notice how I use the I just use a cigarette lighter basically to turn the plane to the side, and just for just a moment hit the heat shrink with a lighter without burning or melting anything, just enough to get it to shrink. Just a moment, it's all it takes. So one last thing I want to do before we put on all the control linkages is I want to attach the motor. Now notice that all the servos have the wires coming out on this side of the aircraft, all on the same side of the aircraft. And I'm going to attach the motor and then glue the electronics on right underneath here for the ESC. So let's go ahead and do that first. One thing we haven't done yet, I did glue down the servo for the ailerons. I did not glue down the servo for the rudder or for the elevator. So I'm going to go ahead and glue those and then attach the motor. Okay, so I'm going to attach the motor, and again, all the wires for the servos are all on the same side. So I'm going to make sure that the motor wires come off in the lower corner on the same side that all the other wires are on. So now that I have the motor mount on the front, or the motor mounted on the front, I've then taken the wires for the motor mount to the side where all of the wires are going and glued the ESC and the wires going to the motor here towards the front of the aircraft. And later I will use the balancing tool to figure out where the battery is going to go, so I can take the battery connector and punch a hole up through the top side where the battery is going to sit up here somewhere. So now I'm going to go ahead and hook up the electronics so I can center all the servos and go ahead and put the control rods in. Okay, so the first thing we have to do here is I'm going to take this little piece and I'm going to snap it in. Well, first I'm going to slide it into the eyelet. So I need to loosen that screw up. There we go. And then I'm going to snap that into the control horn on the elevator. Sorry, not the elevator, on the aileron. It definitely took a few minutes of patience, but I finally got the control linkage snapped into the control horn and loose over here on the eyelet, and I need to do the same thing to the other side. Once I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape the wings so that they're in a neutral position. I'm going to tape it on both sides to be in a neutral position, and now that I have the electronics on, I will center the servo and then go ahead and tighten down the two screws on both sides. So I'm going to use this tiny little screwdriver, or actually it's a fitting for a screwdriver, to tighten these up because it's really a tight spot. So now that I have them tightened up, I can go ahead and remove the tape off the wings. Again, I taped it here and taped it over here to keep the wings in a neutral position when I was tightening up the linkages. And trust me, you only want to tighten those up once, so make sure you have the wings nice and straight when you tighten them up the first time, and that your servo is powered and centered. Okay, so now notice there are two push rods, both the same length. They're control rods. They're both the same length. And I'm going to start with the rudder. Okay, so I've got the little control rod snapped into the rudder control horn, and then I've got all my little pieces here. The support pieces for the rod. There's 5 of them running down the side, and then it comes over here, and I have it through the eyelet on the servo horn. So I haven't glued any of these down yet, because what I want to do is I want to go ahead and line it and make sure it's as straight as possible with the servos centered with power on. And I'm going to tape the rudder. I have to tape the rudder in a neutral position, tighten this up at the servo, and then at that point I'll be ready to add a little glue to each one of the support pieces and then put those into the fuselage so that the control rod will be as straight as possible. I decided to go ahead and use the carbon fiber ones. I was going to use plastic, but I think these will actually work out okay. So I've got it all glued in, and the control rod is tightened up. All the supports are glued in. and that was relative to the neutral position of the tail. If I could get this thing to focus as it should. So I already took the tape off, but I had tape here to hold the tail in the neutral position while I was accomplishing this task. So one thing I noticed is that this last support for the rudder was really moving, like back and forth, and it is very weak connection. There's no way that was going to hold up to the test of time. So what I did is I took since I'm not using these little pieces from the landing gear, I just cut a little piece off, made a little triangle wedge, and then used the foam tack to glue that wedge in on to help support this last bracket, because there's no way that was going to hold up. So this concludes putting the rudder together. So next will be the elevator. All right, so I've got the control rod snapped in and all the little supports in and tightened in with the servo powered and centered. And notice I do have the tape still on my elevator to make sure it's nice and straight. So this part's finished. So as you can see, I have the motor tied into the ESC glued to the side of the plane. There's a battery connector, which we'll bring up through here to the top later. And then I have all the wires going to the receiver, all kind of glued down over here, and the receiver glued down right here, just kind of under the wing here. And next I'm going to glue down the antennas. Of course, don't put any glue on the exposed part of the antenna. Okay, so I got the antennas glued in, kind of like this. I usually like to do one vertical and one horizontal, but there's not a whole lot of room to take anything vertical. So I kind of tied them in like this. So then last thing we're going to do for our setup is get the radio ready and need to set the rates, and see what the throws are going to be for the different rates. All right, so let's do one last check before we go ahead and check the throws for the different rates. Make sure that everything is going the correct direction. Very important. Make sure when you take ailerons right, you're turning right. Same for left. And then if I'm going to fly, here's let's see. So that is, so my elevator is reversed. So I'm going up on elevator. No, that's right. Back in elevator is climb, so that's correct. Elevator is right. All right, so back, that's climb. That's descend. Okay, so that's right. Yeah, here, left, right. So tail rotor looks right. So now we can start checking out the throws and setting the rates. Okay, I set my rates up so that I've got about 25% throw on the ailerons, elevator. The rudder I have a bit more because I like having a lot more rudder control on the lower rates, and of course the high rates pretty much just full on. There wasn't a whole lot of throw to really divide into 3 rates. So I did add a little bit more expo on the mid rates than I have on the high rates. Other than that, the rates are set up. So now we're going to put on the propeller, and then we'll be ready to balance the plane out and set the battery. Then we'll be done. So to put the little rubber band that holds the propeller on, which is nice because it helps to save the propeller when you're landing, especially if you're not landing without gear. What I like to do is use this little tool. They have another tool you can purchase, but this is just a regular screwdriver without the bit in there, and I'll use this to kind of pull the rubber band around to attach the propeller. So now I'm going to do the balancing of the aircraft. I'm going to place the battery, pull this cable up through to be able to attach to the battery, but we need to get it set up at the proper CG. Now the CG, there's a spar that runs all the way through here. Let's turn this upside down here. This spar right here That spar is at your center point of gravity. So I'm going to use the little gravity machine, which I'm going to get here in a second, and level it out, find exactly where the battery needs to sit, and then we'll be ready to go fly. So I've got the balancing machine out. It's 135 millimeters from the front of the plane back to the spar. Spar should be sitting basically over the center point of the balancing machine. And what I've noticed is that the plane is so well balanced that the battery is sitting almost right in the center of the CG point. So that's where I'm going to place my battery. I'm going to Velcro it to the side and then run my wires up, and then we'll be ready to fly. So let's take a look around the aircraft, kind of check it out. Doesn't have landing gear, like landing this just on the grass, and you can land it anywhere pretty much. And, get a look in the front here, kind of underneath. And the wind's getting it. Set that back up. Now, where's my crew chief? Hey, Sadie, come here. Check out my plane. Make sure it's ready to fly. Come on. People are waiting here. Come on. Check it out. What do you think? Pass your inspection? Yeah. Guess this was little. You're not that interested in it, huh? That wasn't a very good pre-flight. Oh, you gonna go back for more? There we go. Get your pre-flight. You done? It's ready to go? Yeah? So let's check this plane out. Looks pretty nice. Host looking pretty decent. Let's see how it stands up. And it's time to take to the skies. So what can I say about the Mini Pitts? It doesn't like flying well in 7 knots of wind, although it was still fun to fly, even with the 7 knots of wind. I didn't fly it in a really tiny space like I wanted to try initially, because eventually I want to fly it around here, and I may do a follow-up video later flying it in a smaller space once I've had a little more practice with this tiny plane. But it's definitely better to fly it in a very low wind environment. This thing could probably easily fly indoors. It's a pretty neat little plane. So it was fun. Now the one thing I will say, the really tiny 250 milliamp battery, 30C battery that I was flying this with, I had 2 of those, and I was only getting 2 minutes per flight, and it ran the batteries almost completely dry after 2 minutes, which is not good for the batteries. So I'm definitely going to order a larger battery for this and see how it performs with the larger battery. So I would recommend that. The 250 milliamp battery is definitely underpowered. Now, I was also overcoming some wind, which probably, mean I'm flying closer to full throttle the whole flight, but still 2 minutes and completely wearing down the battery. That's not great. But I'm going to get a larger battery, and I'm going to try flying this in some smaller spaces. And one thing about this plane is that it's under 0.55 pounds, which means you do not require a remote ID to fly this plane, which is really nice if you're flying in an area where there is no FRIA, if you're not flying in a FRIA site. So that's one nice thing about this plane. I have several others that fall under 0.55 pounds with the battery as well. So that's a really nice thing. And as far as, would I buy another one of these put together? This is a fun build. Everything's so small, but I might. It is a pretty neat little plane. I kind of want to buy the larger one, but then I can't fly it in such a small space. And again, might have some videos for that. But we have some other build videos and other flight videos, so check out our channel. And if you haven't subscribed, click that subscribe button if you'd like to. And just check out all the other things we have going on. And thanks for watching.